Well, hey, friends, a little supplementary teaching this week. Try something different to go along with our weekend liturgy. And if you haven't read the passage yet, we're in Mark chapter 1, verse 29 to 34. That is the section that has been assigned for us. And our story this week takes place in the little seaside village of Capernaum. How about a few pictures to go along with this weekend? A little show and tell. I visited Capernaum, I don't know, about 10 years ago now, and here's what is left, or the archaeological evidence of the town. You note in the background there, yeah, that's right on the edge of the Sea of Galilee. And this town that was all communal living with these courtyards and adjoined rooms, this is how people lived. And this was the hometown that Jesus chose to minister from when he began his years of ministry. Here's a picture of the synagogue. Now, this wasn't the story of the place where the synagogue that Jesus would have ministered in, but right below the foundations of this one, that was the location of the synagogue in Jesus' day. This was built shortly after his time. And this picture here is of a church, a Catholic church, and you notice that section in the middle, that's a glass floor that those railings are on. What's the glass floor looking at? Well, that glass floor looking down into a home. What's the home? Well, the home, this next picture is the home they believe to be that of Peter himself, the disciple Peter. There is evidence and findings with his name written on it and those other kinds of things, that this was the room that Peter lived within in Jesus' day. Quite amazing. And the church, to commemorate this amazing location, built this church over top of it as I say, to commemorate this amazing location. All right, so the story itself. Well, the story is obviously chapter 1, beginning right at the very beginning of Jesus' years of ministry. And what's interesting about that to me is that when he's starting something, when you're starting something out, I mean, there's a white hot focus. Not that Jesus lost this focus in his 3 years of ministry, but you see even right out of the gates the priorities that Jesus would have, and the priorities of the kingdom, and therefore then the priorities of God. And that's what I wanted to focus on this little meditation. First thing that I notice here in this story is that he is eminently interested in people. The story that begins right before this, Jesus has called the disciples, the early disciples, to follow him, and he's encountering this man that is possessed with something in the synagogue. And now in this story, Jesus is healing Peter's mother-in-law of something simple like a fever. But it reveals in Jesus, and remember, we're in Epiphany right now, so this season is revealing and reminding us that Jesus is making known to us not just himself, but the very character and the nature of God, that he is God with skin on. And so this focus in on something so simple as a woman is reminding us that Jesus and God is ultimately concerned about the wholeness, about the well-making of people, whatever their ailment may be it spiritual or be it physical, that this is the prime concern about Jesus, that he has come to deliver, he has come to make us whole, he has come to make us new. And this, as I say, is a reflection of the heart of God. Now, second thing that interests me about this is that Jesus is ministering, of course, right, under Rome. He's under Caesar Tiberius. He's under Herod Antipas. In fact, a few chapters later on in Mark chapter 6, we're going to read about all of the evils and the sordid details that went on in Herod's life that ultimately then end in the murder of Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist. But there is all of this darkness that exists in the powers of Rome and the empire of Rome and in Herod Antipas. And remember, Jesus himself is a king, right? So he could be ministering on this level, going after these things, dealing with these things on a kingly level, but that is not what he does. In fact, he pays throughout his ministry such little attention to Rome. 4 different times he's invited for an audience before Herod Antipas. He never goes. In fact, the only time that he goes before Rome is in the trial that prepares him for the crucifixion. And when he's asked to speak to Pilate, the Roman governor, he says nothing at all. Instead, his eyes are fixed on a woman with a fever and on a man who's plagued spiritually. This is the focus of Jesus' attention. He is concerned about people, which isn't to say that he isn't also concerned about the powers and the structures that exist within Rome and all the other empires and all the rest of the countries and powers that exist through all of history. Of course he is, but Jesus is going to reveal that the way that he's going to deal with these powers is through the establishing of his own kingdom, a kingdom within the kingdoms. And this kingdom, Jesus is going to say, is going to start out like a mustard seed, and it's going to be like yeast in a batch of dough, and it's going to grow as people learn to live the way of the kingdom. And in that, they subvert the kingdoms like Rome. Now we say, why is that important? Well, it's important to me. What stood out to me is that I'm aware, and you are aware of this as well, about the fixation, it seems, the obsession that the church has in these days with politics and with power, and with who's in charge, and whether or not this person is God's man for the job, or whatever it may be. But what we see throughout the Gospels is a Jesus who was not obsessed with the powers. He knew that the powers were going to be dethroned. But he was obsessed with the well-being of his neighbor, with people, with a woman with a fever. And as disciples that were watching in on this, he was modeling for them the way of the kingdom. A kingdom that is focused primarily on this task, that you would love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that there is an important reminder for the church in all of this. In these days, there is the propensity that we would obsess and focus and think about these bigger things. But the scriptures are inviting us to the way of Jesus, that we would be primarily fixing our attention on how and who we are being called to love. And may the Lord bless you and keep you in the week to come.